Hi folks, another weekly update from me. I'm out of Israel. So last week I came from Tel Aviv, which was a pretty amazing experience in terms of being somewhere totally different, maxing out every day with a combination of conference talks and meetings and a trip to Jerusalem, which, as I said in the weekly update last Friday, I think I did it Thursday, and then I published it before I went to the airport. That was pretty amazing. And if you're watching last week, and there was the guy who came up and he had the sign and he interrupted me in the middle of it. Some people said later on, apparently the sign said the guy was deaf and he couldn't speak. And that's why he had the sign. And in my mind, I'm like, is this someone who is communicating in I don't know, maybe this is a local thing. Maybe it's a TV program. I didn't quite know what it was. So I sort of said to the guy, look, I'm sorry, I'm recording. But anyway, apparently that was the theory, because I said afterwards, I wonder if maybe he can't speak and that's what he's doing, or maybe he can only speak Hebrew and then he doesn't, or he knows that I can't. Anyway, regardless, that's what it was last week. I'm back in Oslo at the moment. Whilst I'm going through this have I been pwned process, I'm spending a bit of time here whilst I do a bunch of meetings and phone calls and other things that are just a lot more convenient on this part of the world. And I'm going to talk more about that over the coming weeks as things unfold. In fact, at the end of this weekly update, I'm going to share some interesting stats on Have I Been Pwned, because at the moment I seem to be spending my life gathering stats and answering questions about what the service does. And I thought some of them were kind of interesting. Now, first things first, I made a tweet on Monday, I think, which was a really, really badly worded tweet. And frankly, it made me look like a bit of a dick. Now, I want to explain what the tweet was, what the context was, and hopefully in this forum being video where you're not constrained to 280 characters and a bit of sentiment comes across, it will make it a bit clearer. So I was hanging out here in the Airbnb I'm staying in Monday. I've been away for about a month now. And I was thinking about my kids, I was thinking about my daughter and the fact that she was learning to code. And I thought, I got this really good video that I'd put on Twitter in a tweet. I will share that. And in my mind, it's like, isn't it a nice positive thing my little girl is learning how to code? Now, unfortunately, when I worded the tweet, it wasn't so good. I worded the tweet and then I went out in the sunshine and rode a scooter for a while, and then I turned the Twitters off so I could focus on work. When I turned it back on, I could see how badly it was being received. So I subsequently deleted the tweet, put out another one and said, look, sorry folks, this is just really, really bad representation of what I actually meant. So I don't have the original tweet to read out, but it was along the lines of the gender discussion online very often blows up into sort of nasty arguments. I'm trying to stay out of that and instead focus on my daughter and teach her to code. Now, here's where it really does read badly, and I saw that once I looked at it later on. It reads like I have the luxury of not being involved in the discussion because I'm a male, and that I don't want to contribute to it, and I don't want to try and further the cause of women in technology, etc. I see how that read now. That was really, really poorly worded, and I do apologise if you've read that and you've made the assumption that I don't care about it. It was a crappy thing to write. Now, that wasn't the sentiment, and I want to explain what the sentiment is. When the debate is had on the public timeline, particularly on Twitter, which, as I've said many times before, seems to be getting more and more hostile on every single front, it very quickly turns vitriolic. And if you look through the responses, you just go back and look for mentions of my name from about Monday, you can see how people do get really angry. And again, I can understand when you take it in that context, I can see why people are upset. But even as the discussion goes off onto other things, you see people arguing really aggressively in ways that nobody has ever argued with me in person at a conference or anything like that, because when you're in person, you get to convey sentiment and emotion and things like this. So that the sentiment for me was these discussions, when they're had in that form on the public timeline, often become really counterproductive. They do escalate out of control really quickly. And as a passive observer of a lot of these, it seems like everyone kind of walks away a loser as well. Now, it's important that the discussion does happen and that everyone contributes. The way I contribute is I'm involved in a lot of agenda committees. I'm involved in a lot of selection of speakers. And I'll tell you what, every single time I'm in an agenda committee, whether it's for a conference or a panel or anything like that, the discussion about diversity, whether it be based on gender or race or anything else that's important to have a good sort of cross-section representation of society is a massive topic. Honestly, it's like probably the number one most important thing, alongside actually having good content that people want to see, that comes up time and time and time again. And there's a huge amount of effort spent trying to get good representation from women in the industry, and also make sure that we get the right content, and also make sure that we get diversification of race and things like this. A lot of effort goes into this, and I don't think that's always visible publicly. So, the point I'm trying to make there is that this doesn't mean I'm not engaged in the discussion. It means that I think having the discussion online, in Twitter, in the public forum, is often counterproductive. Now, that's my view. Some people will have a different view. And to that effect, if anyone does want to talk to me about it, the DMs are open. Like, send me a DM. And in fact, for a couple of people who did send me DMs, I said, look, I'm happy to jump on the phone and have a chat about it as well. I would love to find better constructs for us to get diversity within the industry and try and avoid these debates, which can turn, as I said, vitriolic very, very quickly. I guess, lastly, the bit on my daughter as well. Some of the discussion there sort of went down the line of, when she gets into high school, she'll realise that she's, not like the other kids and that she's not male and won't have the same opportunities. I think that's partly right insofar as the way the industry stands today. If she goes into the industry, she'll certainly have problems with that. And frankly, if she's online, she'll have problems with that. She actually goes to a girls' school, so not necessarily by design. There's a whole other story about why she's at a girls' school. But when she goes through high school, and particularly as she starts getting into the years where they have coding in the curriculum, which will be about another 3 years for her. In Australia, it's about year 5. They start getting code in the curriculum. She will be surrounded by other girls learning the same thing. My expectation then is that I want to be able to do the same thing with her and her classmates as I've been doing with my son. So, for example, my son, who's 9 years old now, so he's a few years further down the line, was here in Norway with me in January, and then he came to London and he did a talk on kids learning to code. We went back to his school afterwards and we did the same talk to his classmates and answered a whole bunch of questions about what the industry is like for coding. My hope is that I can do that with my daughter as well. I hope she enjoys standing up in front of an audience and speaking like my son does. I'll certainly be there in her school trying to do the same thing. And particularly because of the fact that we've got this imbalance, I'd like to think that there's an opportunity to influence girls more by virtue of the fact she's going to be at a school surrounded by girls. Now, I know also in the discussion, some people said, look, it's not a pipeline problem. And what I'm understanding from some of those discussions is that there's no good just having more girls and then they come into an industry that has all the same problems as it has now. It's not just the spread of people in different genders, it's the hostility that a lot of them feel. And I understand that point. I think that's a very important point. And again, that's something that my sphere of influence allows me to act on within agenda committees and things like that, and making sure that we create environments that women want to be in. And again, if people have ideas on this, please DM me, send me an email. There's a contact link on my blog. I'd love to hear about it, and we'll try and address that. So again, lastly, I understand that this is a really, really important issue for people that do have to face it every day. Obviously, it's different for me as a male. This is an immutable attribute of my personality. It's always going to be a different story for me as it is for women. And again, it was a badly, badly worded tweet. I hope the intent and the sentiment is a little bit clearer now. Okay, so I'm going to move forward onto other things. And I actually had 2 blog posts this week, so it's nice to actually get back to writing some blogs, even though they might have been quite short ones. So first one, the Austrian government is now on board with Have I Been Pwned, so they are using Have I Been Pwned in the same way as the UK government, Australian government, Spanish government, and there's a few others I'm chatting with that are in the pipeline at the moment. And basically what that means is that they have access to do domain searches via an API for everything that is .gv.at TLD. So effectively, the Austrian government TLD, they can do whatever searches they want for any domain on that, as well as some other whitelisted domains, because government domains aren't always on GovTLDs. So that gives them access to that, which gives them much better visibility into what is going on with Austrian people, or Austrian people in government having their things pwned. So, I'm talking about that because of transparency as well, because it's really important for me that every way that have I been pwned gets used, particularly by the likes of government, where people do tend to insinuate maybe governments are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Transparency is super important. I'm happy to have those guys on board. They did obviously agree to me talking about it publicly as well, which is fantastic. So Austrian government's on there now as well. Next thing, good news story. So I got my MVP renewed. So it is the 9th year of me being a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. It is a program that has been enormously impactful on me. Getting the first MVP award is what drove me to start speaking publicly. I hadn't done public talks before I got my award. I'd written a lot of blog posts, no talks. That started me on that trajectory, and then of course the rest is history, and then all the other reasons that my career went the way it did. A lot of it is attributed back to the MVP award and the things that that then led to. So I'm super, super proud to have that awarded again. I am still also a Microsoft Regional Director, which, as I said in the blog post, means I don't have a region, I don't direct anything, and I don't get paid. It is a very nice title though, and it does give me some great access to some awesome people, both other RDs and people within Microsoft too. So for the curious, the MVP award gets renewed annually on the 1st of July. The RD is every 2 years. Next year will be my renewal year for the RD. And all things going well, hopefully that is another title that I can keep. Right, so that is the blog post. Now, I promised to talk about some Have I Been Pwned stats, and as I go through Project Svelbar, and for those of you, I just realised I put my camera on my bag on the table, and I think the whole thing's starting to lean. So I'll just fix that up a little bit. Very professional here today. So as I mentioned, Project Svelbar is the process of finding a new home for Have I Been Pwned. It's trying to find an organisation who can grow the service into the things I'd like it to be. So for example, processing a lot more of the data, which is there in breaches that still hasn't been tackled. Notifying more individuals than just the roughly 2.8 million notification users I have. Doing a better job at helping organisations do disclosure. Like there's a heap of things that I can do with Have I Been Pwned when it is under the right banner. As well as, frankly, taking a heap of stress off my shoulders. So, as part of this process, we're speaking to a bunch of different companies. Us being KPMG, who are running the M&A process, the merger and acquisition process, and myself. And inevitably, there are loads of questions about numbers, particularly numbers around growth stats, around how many people are using it, how many notifications are being sent. And I've got a spreadsheet here, and I thought I'd just share some stats because I find these quite fascinating. And I guess one of the challenges of running this whole thing myself and just focusing on the function of the service is that it's rare for me to take a step back and go, okay, well, what does this whole thing actually look like? So here is what it looks like. I'm going to go through a few different tabs here. And hopefully you'll find some of this interesting. 369 data breaches in the service as of today, encompassing about 7.8 billion breached records. Now, it's interesting to have a look at these breach stats in sort of two different ways. So one is the number of breached records over time. And one of the interesting things here is the graph kind of ticks along here and then it goes up very suddenly and then it's like this and then up very suddenly, because what tends to happen is there are major incidents which can be really, really large in size, such as the 773 million records in the Collection 1 credential stuffing list in January. That upticks massively in terms of breached records. When I look at the other graph here, and this one is the number of breaches over time, those, what did I say it was, 359 breaches? I'll get my stats right now. The 369 breaches, it's actually a pretty constant line over there. So the rate of new breaches is very steady. Now just, maybe just for the sake of simplicity, let's have a look at where we were 2 years ago. Because last time I did the stats, I think on average there was one new breach in Have I Been Pwned about every 4 days. So if I go back to, let's just go back to this 1st of, where are we? What are we at today? we're into July, 4th of July 2017, we're at 226 then. So we've done another 143 breaches in 2 years, 143, 70, so that's 70 something a year. So yeah, probably every 4 to 5 days on average, there's a new data breach. When I get time, and this again is partly why I'm having a bit of an extended trip here in Norway, I want to just churn through a whole bunch of it. I think I might put like a day aside and just, I don't know, like can I get through half a dozen in a day? Always depends on disclosure, like how many of these do I then need to start having dialogue with the organisation involved on. So that was that one, breaches. Notification users. So this is the number of people that have signed up to get notifications when they're in a new data breach. Now the stats as of yesterday put us up at, where were we? So 3rd of July, 2.772 million. And it's interesting to sort of look at the growth rate there as well, because in some ways it's kind of steady, and there's sort of a steady, you know, nice up and to the left, which way you guys, up and to the left kind of graph. But what happens as well is there are periods where it escalates massively. So there's a massive escalation around the January timeframe when that collection one credential stuffing went in, credential stuffing list went in. I got about 10 million people to the site in one day. And of course, that just led to a huge amount of the growth. So in fact, that'll be interesting. If I go and have a look at January this year, how many people were signing up in like a one-day period? Here we go. 17th of January, 113,441 people signed up in one day. That was big. The next day was 90,550, and then there was only 25,000. On average, there's something like more than 1,000 people a day that actually sign up to this service. And this is sort of on average over long periods of time. More recently, when I look at the stats, let's look at July, you know, there's like 900, 600, 600, 900, 900, 1,000, 1,700, 1,500. It's a really healthy sort of growth rate. Part of that, of course, is it's amazing how many people you can get to use your service when you give it away for free. So that has definitely helped the growth of Have I Been Pwned. So next one here is the notification messages that have been sent as well. Why does my camera keep leaning over there? And when I look at the notifications, so this is how many emails have I sent to individuals who've been in data breaches. And the total number here, and it actually surprised me kind of how high this was when I pulled the stats, is almost 7 million, 6.996 million. So probably after the next data breach goes in, we'll tick over 7 million. And of course, that's sort of driven by two things, the number of notifications. One is that over time, there are more and more notification users. Of course, it's almost 2.8 million now per the previous stats just mentioned. The other is they only get notifications once data is loaded. Now, when you have something like a really big data breach that needs to send a large number of notifications to an increasingly large pool of subscribers, then we get big numbers. So if I go back to January and we go back to that credential one or collection one credential stuffing list, you know what, I've got to check these figures because that only shows, that's actually kind of strange. I'm going to have to check my figures. Individual notifications sent, because, oh no, that's 2018. Let's go to 2019. See what happens when you rush and you don't think these things through? It's been the week for that. Okay, back to January. 16th of January, this is UTC, 17th of January, my time back in Australia, 769,437 notification emails sent in one day. That's insane. Like that is more emails in one go than what I'd normally send in a month. Well, it certainly was some time ago, but of course now the amount I send every month is just increasing because of the growing subscriber rates. So that was interesting. Domain notification users. So these are the number of people who have done a domain search, verified that they control the domain, and then subscribed and said, now that I control this, let me know if any email address on my domain is in a data breach. So, how many of those do we have? If we look at the figures, 126,150, so more than 126,000 people who control a domain and can demonstrate they control a domain are now on the list to get notifications when there's a breach. And again, like that has just been a constant hockey stick kind of increase here, except for January when it's just gone like whack, just vertical. And then it's slowly gone back to normal sort of growth rates. Now, the one that's kind of interesting here as well, related to that, is domain searches. So how many people have done searches for domains? And when I look at this number, of course, it's going to be a higher number because you have, in many cases, the one individual who controls multiple domains. So, for example, it might be a big organisation that has multiple domains that map to different brands. Now, in this case, we are looking at a number quite a bit larger than the previous one. So we're up to 241,000 domain searches that have been done. So pushing on about 250,000, which is pretty cool. That's domain searches. And the last one here is domain notifications sent. So emails sent to those people who've done the searches, verified that they control the domain, and then I've sent off notifications to them. And the number there is a 7-figure number, and it is about 1.138 million notifications. So combining that with the almost 7 million notifications sent to individual users, we're now at about 8.1 something million emails I've sent just to say, hey, you've been pwned. So they're kind of interesting stats. I thought they were interesting anyway, just to sort of see that constant growth rate. And every single growth rate has that nice kind of, sounds like a sales pitch now. But honestly, like this is just the data that I've been pulling in response to questions. So that's really interesting. As we sort of see more data breaches go in, particularly the notifications sent are going to exponentially increase because you've got a greater pool of users, as I discussed before, that you need to send them to. So that's that bit. In terms of the whole Svalbard thing, it's as I said before, like it's equal parts daunting and exciting. It's daunting insofar as I'm just getting bombarded with requests for data. I'm signing NDAs like a crazy person at the moment. Meetings non-stop, a lot of legal stuff as well, which is necessary, but if I'm honest, like not a lot of fun, but it's stuff that you've got to go through. It's progressing, at least. We have sort of started with a very, very large number of organisations that were potential fits, and now it's sort of filtering down. I certainly have in my mind who I think some of the best ones are, but I'm seeing some surprises in there as well in terms of what some organisations would like to be able to do with the service. So that's sort of where it's at the moment. As the whole thing progresses, I'll update people on what's happening there. I'm going to be here in this Airbnb for the next couple of weeks at least, and then I'm going to be in the States for a while after that, doing a lot of meetings. And while I'm here in Norway, I am trying to get out and spend a little bit of time with some companies here locally as well. I can say this one because they tweeted it. I went and saw the Norwegian, I don't know the name in Norwegian, but it's like the Consumer Protection Council there. So I went and had a chat with them because they had done a bunch of work with Ken Munro from Pentest Partners in the UK, who was the guy I did the work on the TikTok Track Watch with. And he'd been working with the consumer folks here back in 2017, identifying crazy things with watches and IoT. And it was a really nice meeting with those guys because they were really interested in how do we help protect Norwegians in the digital realm. So how do we help protect them against things like poorly designed kids tracking watches. They've released material before on things like, I don't know if anyone remembers the Kayla doll. So this is the talking doll that listens to your voice, sends it up on the internet, and then comes back with responses. So that was really cool. Saw them a few days ago. Had a coffee with a journalist this morning doing a piece, so it's nice to go and do things face to face. Got another meeting. I'm not sure if I can say who they are, but after, if they tweet it, I'll share. Going seeing another Norwegian company today. And they're all just sort of casual chats and talk about the things that are happening in the world of InfoSec. So, last thing, this week's sponsor, brand new sponsor this week, Shape Security. So Shape Security does a whole heap of work around protecting organisations from credential stuffing. They're certainly one of the biggest names in that space. They are talking about how CAPTCHA alone is no longer enough, and they have some super sophisticated, super smart software designed to help organisations establish whether requests coming in to do things like authenticate to your services are actually legitimate, or whether it's someone working through a great big list like that collection one, which caused me so much stress back in January. So go and check out Shape Security. They're doing awesome work. I will come to you again from the same location next week, and hopefully actually between then and now I may have even been able to release something new and have I been pwned. I actually got to spend about half a day just writing code yesterday, which was really, really refreshing. So hopefully if I get a little bit more focus time over the next week, I'll be able to launch that as well. And if not next week, I'm going to make sure it's the week after, because after that my time's going to go nuts again as well. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this useful, and I hope that particularly my overview about that tweet gave better context than what does tend to come through in 280 characters worth of messaging. Thanks, folks. See you later.